Welcome to the long-awaited introduction to Gemara. This will be including that which we already covered in class a little bit, as well as some more details in a number of areas. So first of all, we talked about what Moshe received at Har Sinai. We know that on Har Sinai, Moshe received, we spoke about this in class, both Torah Sheba'al as well as Torah Sheba'al, both the oral and the written Torah. We talked about the relationship between them. The Torah Sheba'al you could look at as an explanation of the Torah, or as a decoder ring, or as the Cliff Notes and the full version, the mobile version of the app, whichever analogy you understand best. That's kind of what we understood in class. The Torah Sheba'al includes, very simply, Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Those books are included in the Torah Sheba'al, whereas the Torah Sheba'al, we'll talk about what's included in that in a little bit. In terms of how it was transmitted, this is important because it's going to be relevant when it comes to understanding how things came to be. So initially, Moshe learned everything from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, pasuk by pasuk, with the explanation, with the Torah Sheba'al. So Moshe didn't learn everything in a vacuum. He learned the entirety of Torah together from God. At that point, Moshe goes and teaches it to Bnei Yisrael, but he does it in the following way. First, he teaches it to Aaron, then Elazar and Itamar, with Aaron still in the room. Then the 70 elders, again, the previous ones are still in the room. And then he teaches it once the entire nation. What happens is then each one goes ahead and teaches until each thing has been taught four times. So Moshe teaches halacha 4 times. First to Aaron, then Elazar and Itamar, then the 70 elders, then the entire nation. Then Moshe is done, so to speak, with his teaching. Aaron would then teach, right, the entire nation, so that now Aaron has been involved in the halacha 4 times. The entire nation now has heard it twice. Elazar and Itamar then would teach, so that now the nation heard it 3 times. They have been involved 4 times. Then the 70 elders, etc. Each one either learns or teaches in turn until each group has now heard the halacha 4 times. First from Moshe, then from Aaron, Elazar and Itamar, then the 70 elders, depending on where they are in the order. And then the officers of the people would go around to make sure to do chazara, to make sure that everyone understands what's going on. That's what happened in terms of the initial transmission. So everyone heard the halachot 4 times at least. What happens? As a result, we have this thing called broken telephone. I'm sure you've all played the game. What happens is that not everything gets through. Before Moshe died, therefore, he offered an opportunity for all to come and ask and clarify. There's a whole discussion, say for Yoshua, about Yoshua perhaps not availing himself of that opportunity. That's not our issue now, though. Once Moshe died, so now we have kind of what's left. What are we left with? What's the situation? So some things were learned directly from Moshe, and everybody knew them. Everybody agreed to them. Those things there are no arguments about. Again, those things that there's a direct Masorah for from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Like we'll talk later on about halacha l'Moshe miSinai. There's no debate. There's no arguments about that. That's ish mipi ish Moshe Rabbeinu. We have a tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu. However, there are some things that were not explicitly covered by Moshe, and Chazal, at different stages, the leaders learned out using the 13 exegetical tools which were given to Moshe Har Sinai. We actually say them every day at the end of Korbanot, the Shlosha Esrei Midot Shahatorah Nidreshet Behem, the 13 tools that we were given to learn out the halachot from the text. Okay, all of those are textual tools, and here there begins to be debate. Because here there's debate, how exactly do you use the tools? When are they applicable? Is that a good limud or not? So that already begins the debate. And how do we determine what to do, right? There are many legitimate alternatives. There are many sides, legitimate sides of the debate. How do we decide what to do on a practical level? The rule is majority rules, right? Acharei rabim lahatot. It's a pasuk in the Torah, but we go based on the majority. Okay, so we see already, once Moshe has died, that things are not so simple. So what does this mean for us? This means that, well, there are many viable opinions. We practically need to know what to do. And therefore we follow majority rules. But that doesn't mean that the dissenting opinions were not legitimate. They're very legitimate. Just that practically we have to have one way of doing things. This system and its laws were passed on successfully generation to generation. Again, not just what to do, but the various opinions on the matter and our practice, which was decided on by majority rules. So our Misorah now is not just the halachot that Moshe Rabbeinu passed down to us, that he taught us when he came down Har Sinai, Torah Sheba'al with Torah Sheba'al Peh. But now there's already entered into it this idea, this concept of machloket, this concept of multiple opinions, where it's not that one is right and one is wrong. They're all legitimate possibilities. They're all legitimate opinions, right? That's what we call elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. That these are all legitimate opinions. They all are reflections of the Torah. But practically speaking, we have a rule of what to do. Which brings us to this concept of Misora and how it lends itself to our everyday. We're going to talk about a number of different periods of time and a number of different generations. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot goes through the basic Shalshelat HaKabbalah. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, u'masra liYoshua, Yoshua l'Zikenim, Zikenim l'Neviim, u'Nesiim masura l'Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. So the first major group of people we have to know after the groups we spoke about in terms of the initial transmission, right? The initial transmission was done by Moshe and his cohort to all of Bnei Israel. Moshe passed on the Masorah to Yoshua to the Zikanim, the Nevi'im carry on, and then we get the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. Who are the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah? The Anshei Knesset HaGdolah are the men of the Great Assembly. There are 120 people. In fact, the Knesset today is based off of them. Oh, here, one second. Let's go to that slide. The Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, here we go, were a group of 120 scholars, among them the last of the Nevi'im, right? We know that the period of Nevuah ended at a certain point, so among them are the last of the Nevi'im. The generation that returns from Babel to Yerushalayim and building the Beit HaMikdash, that time period, that's when the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah existed. That's when this group was in existence. The last of the group was Shimon HaTzadik, who's a famous for a number of reasons. Again, like I said before, the Knesset is actually modeled after the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, has 120 members. Why is this significant? So a number of important things were done by the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. In terms of accomplishments, the most significant accomplishment that for us today on a practical sense is that they were the ones who authored the Sidur. What does it mean they authored the Sidur? It means that they put together the Seder of Tefillah, and there are certain things they wrote, like Baruch She'amar and Yishtabach, were authored actually by Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. But they gave a lot of Seder, a lot of order to some of the practice that we do, including davening. They gave form to davening. Okay? So this is now, we're talking about the beginning of the Second Temple time period. Still, we are at a point where the Misorah is oral. We have an oral tradition that is still continuing for Moshe Rabbeinu, albeit now with many more opinions, with many more details, with many more moving parts, but it is still an oral tradition. And then we move to what we call the early Mishnaic period. The early Mishnaic period means this is really pre-Mishnayot, pre what we would see in Shas in terms of the personalities, although some people tend to link them together. Okay, so after the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, the next important generation to know is the generation of the Zugot, the pairs. The Zugot are enumerated in that same first parak of Pirkei Avot. Each Mishnah begins with who received the Masorah, and a lot of those are listed here. A lot of those listed there are the Zugot. They served in the Sanhedrin as Nasi and Av Beit Din. They were kind of partners. And there are many debates and opinions already at this point. There are so many that they need to begin to formulate what are the actual laws. How do we know what to do? We have to have some sort of corpus of an organized corpus of halacha, and that's really where Mishnayot begin to appear. And that's why the first parak of some people link the Zugot or lump them in with the generation of the Tanaim, because Zugot authored Mishnayot, as we see in Pirkei Avot, but they only really appear in Pirkei Avot. We see their students, like Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, right? The most famous of them are perhaps Hillel and Shammai, although you have Shmaya and Avtalion, you have Yoshua ben Prachya, Nitaya Arbeli. Again, these names you might know from Pirkei Avot, that they are among the Zugot. The last generation of Zugot is Hillel and Shammai, the most famous ones, because they're the last. And their students author other Mishnayot, but the Zugot only author Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot, the first parak there, and that's why they're really considered a separate generation. Okay, so we have number one, the first generation, it's important, the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, and then we begin to have a corpus of halacha being formulated here already with the Zugot. That's going to continue in the Mishnaic period with the Tanaim. So next up is the Tanaim. The Tanaim are the next Now, if we're counting generations, so we have the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, the next major group is the Zugot, and the next group is the Tanaim. The Tanaim authored thousands of Mishnayot. And eventually to the point where, and again, authored means this is all oral. This is oral statements, right? We define Mishnah as a, it's coming up, I'm sure, I think in the next slide, but we define Mishnah as a psak halacha of a Tana, right? The Mishnah were authored, it means orally authored by the Tanaim. Eventually, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, in the last generation of the Tanaim, redacts the final version of the Mishnah we have today. And again, there is actually some debate as to whether Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi wrote down the Mishnayot or just collected which ones are in and out. Most assume he wrote it down, which is why the next thing, the bullet point says at this point, the Mishnah was written down for fear it would be lost, fear the transmission would end due to the war, due to exile, etc., a lot of external pressure. This was not the plan, nor was it ideal. But as the flexibility of the oral tradition was lost, it was a necessity to write down the Mishnayot. Right? What's called 8 la'asot laHashem heiferu Toratecha. Even though in theory the best system is that it should be oral, 8 la'asot laHashem. There is a time that comes to do for Hashem. In order to save Torah, sometimes we have to alter a slight detail here or there, namely here the oral tradition, in order to save Torah. Here, and again, in the Mishnaic literature, what did they write? They authored a number of things that we spoke about in class. Mishnah is those Mishnayot, those that were authored that were left in by Rabbi Nasi. Breita literally means outside. The Mishnayot that were cut out. And Tosefta, again, is a specific collection of them, printed in the back of the Masechtas. It's an important collection of them, but essentially Toseftas are Breitas. And again, I remind you, all of these have equal status. When we look at them, when the Gemara looks at this corpus of Mishnaic literature, they don't look at a Breita any different. They look at a Mishnah, which is why they will quote it, because they're of equal status. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi took out the ones that were either less accurate or redundant, but at the end of the day, they all are equal in their status, in their authority. What is the Mishnah? So Mishnah, as we said, is a halach ruling of a Tana. The collected halach, there are basically collected halachic rulings. Some Mishnayot have one, some have a number, with very little explanation. There's no reasons given, there's no explanation given. They're not necessarily new halachot or rulings that were created during the times of Tanaim, but we attribute the statements to them because they're the teachers who then went on, so their students, right? They told their students, so it was said in, they are the ones who are now being quoted the same way that I would quote my rabbi as giving psak halacha, right? So therefore they quoted their rabbi, and therefore it's in the name of that Tana. Again, the Tanaim did not create the halacha, they're telling you the Masorah they received. And a listing of the halachic system is in existence at that time. That basically means that what we're talking about now is that the system we're using is now, the reason we have this Mishnayot, etc., is that what the goal in this now is to go through and to try to, again, organize the corpus of halacha and kind of give it as much organization as possible and try to make it so that it's easy to learn and to understand. We know that there are 6 Siddharim of Mishnah. Very quickly, right? Zra'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Kachar, and Taros. The mnemonic device is Zman Nakat, right? That's the Rashi Tevot of Zra'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Kedusha, and Taro. It's the Rashi Prakim, Rashi Tevot, Zman Nakat. Okay, so now we have the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, the Zugot, and the Tanaim, the first 3 major groups of individuals. And now we're going to move on to the Gemara period where we meet the Amoraim. The Amoraim, generation number 4, they authored the Gemara. And again, the Gemara has a number of important purposes which we didn't fully speak about in class. Number 1, to explain the source, give the source for a Mishnaic statement. Again, we said the Mishnayot do not have a lot of explanation given, and therefore we have to know, where did this come from? Where is this coming from? Is it coming from left field? What is it based on? What are the psukim? Which is why many Gemaras start with the phrase minayin or manahani mili, because the goal is that we should know what is the source. The Gemara wants to know what is the source for a given statement in the Mishnah. Purpose number two, is to give the logic behind the halachic system. So, for example, we might know there's a concept of mitzvat aseh, shahazman grama. We might know that women are patur, and we might want to know why. And the Mishnah is not going to explain why. It's going to state it. So the Gemara might delve into, explaining the logic behind that system, or why that system exists, or the proof that a system exists. Again, that's just one example, but it's the logic or the explanation